So you think you're a fraud, huh? Imposter syndrome is so psychologically devastating that 70% of people will experience it at some point in their lives. And here's the truly disturbing part. The more successful you become, the worse it gets. We're talking about a mental trap so vicious that it literally convinces Nobel Prize winners they're frauds who somehow tricked the entire scientific community. But here's what's really messed up. Imposter syndrome doesn't just make you feel bad about yourself, it actually rewires your brain to reject evidence of your own competence. Your mind becomes a hostile prosecutor, systematically building a case against your own abilities while throwing out any evidence in your favor. It's psychological self-sabotage so sophisticated that it makes people quit jobs they're objectively excellent at. Now, imposter syndrome isn't just feeling a little nervous before a presentation. Oh no, that would be too simple for the human brain. This is your mind's Oscar-worthy performance of convincing you that any success you've achieved is basically an elaborate cosmic joke, and everyone around you is just being polite by not pointing out how obviously unqualified you are. Picture this. You've just landed your dream job, and instead of celebrating, your brain immediately starts composing your resignation letter, because surely they'll figure out you have no idea what you're doing by lunch on Monday. It's like your psychological immune system has decided that confidence is a foreign invader that must be destroyed at all costs. The term was first coined by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes back in 1978, when they noticed that high-achieving women kept insisting they were intellectual frauds, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. They called it the impostor phenomenon, though it later got rebranded as imposter syndrome, because apparently we needed it to sound more official and medical. What's particularly delicious about this psychological quirk is that it predominantly affects people who are actually competent. The more successful you become, the louder your brain screams that you're a fake. It's the mental equivalent of your smoke detector going off every time you make toast, except instead of burnt bread, it's detecting success and achievement. But before we dive into why your brain is actively working against you, smash that subscribe button. My psychology degree doesn't pay for itself, and let me know what other mental disorders you'd like me to butcher in the comments. You might be wondering what imposter syndrome actually looks like in the wild, beyond the general feeling that you're one question away from being exposed as a complete amateur. Well, buckle up, because the human brain has developed some truly creative ways to torture perfectly capable people. The classic imposter syndrome experience goes something like this. You receive praise for your work, and instead of thinking, gee, maybe I'm good at this, your brain immediately launches into detective mode, trying to figure out how you accidentally tricked everyone into thinking you're competent. You start attributing your success to luck, timing, or the fact that everyone else must have been having an off day. Research shows that roughly 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives, which means the majority of humans are walking around convinced they're frauds. It's like we're all actors in the same play, but nobody got the script, and everyone's just hoping they don't get caught improvising. The symptoms are beautifully ridiculous when you really think about them. There's the constant fear of being found out, as if your competence is some kind of elaborate Ponzi scheme that's bound to collapse. You might find yourself over-preparing for everything, because surely if you just work hard enough, you can maintain the illusion of knowing what you're doing. Then there's the delightful habit of attributing success to external factors. Got promoted? Must have been because they needed to fill the quota. Won an award? Clearly, the competition wasn't very strong this year. It's like your brain has appointed itself as your personal PR disaster manager, working overtime to ensure you never feel good about anything you accomplish. Some people develop what psychologists call imposter anxiety, which manifests as this low-level panic that someone's going to ask you a question you can't answer, thereby exposing your fundamental inadequacy. It's the psychological equivalent of constantly checking your pockets to make sure you haven't lost your keys, except the keys are your professional credibility. And here's where it gets even more absurd. The people most likely to experience imposter syndrome are often the ones who least deserve to feel like frauds. High achievers, perfectionists, people with advanced degrees, they're all prime candidates for this particular brand of psychological self-sabotage. It's as if success comes with a complementary side order of existential dread. Now, because human psychology can never keep things simple, Imposter syndrome doesn't just come in one delightfully dysfunctional flavor. Oh no, researchers have identified 5 distinct types, because apparently we needed to categorize the different ways our brains can convince us we're incompetent. First up, we have the perfectionist, who believes that anything less than perfection is evidence of their fraudulent nature. These are the people who get 98% on a test and immediately focus on the 2% they got wrong, convinced that those missed points reveal their true incompetence. It's like having a personal critic who's never satisfied and has impossibly high standards for everything you do. Then there's the expert, who feels like a fake unless they know absolutely everything about their field. They won't speak up in meetings unless they're 100% certain of their facts, and they panic at the thought of someone asking a question they can't answer. These folks treat knowledge like a video game where you need to unlock every achievement before you're allowed to feel competent. The soloist is convinced that asking for help is basically admitting defeat. They believe that truly competent people should be able to figure everything out independently, so any time they need assistance, it's proof they don't belong. It's the psychological equivalent of refusing to ask for directions while driving in circles for 3 hours. Finally, there's the superwoman or superman, who feels like they need to excel in every single area of their life to prove their worth. They're trying to be the perfect employee, perfect parent, perfect friend, perfect everything, and any shortcoming in any area is evidence of their overall inadequacy. It's the psychological equivalent of trying to juggle while riding a unicycle, convinced that dropping even one ball proves you're a complete failure. What's particularly fascinating is that these types often overlap and combine in wonderfully neurotic ways. You might be a perfectionist expert who refuses to ask for help because you believe you should naturally know everything without effort. It's like psychological bingo, except instead of winning a prize, you win crippling self-doubt. You might be asking yourself why evolution would gift us with such a delightfully self-defeating psychological mechanism. After all, wouldn't it make more sense for our brains to accurately assess our abilities and feel appropriately confident about our skills? Well, that would be logical, and as we've established, the human brain has a complicated relationship with logic. From an evolutionary perspective, imposter syndrome might actually be a twisted form of social intelligence gone haywire. Back when humans lived in small tribes, being overly confident about your abilities could get you kicked out of the group, or worse, put in charge of something you couldn't handle. A little self-doubt kept you humble, motivated to improve, and less likely to make catastrophic, overconfident decisions. The problem is that this ancient psychological safety mechanism is now running wild in a modern world where competence is often rewarded rather than punished. Your brain is still operating under the assumption that claiming expertise might result in being challenged to prove it by fighting a saber-toothed tiger or something equally terrifying. Research in social psychology suggests that imposter syndrome might also be related to something called illusory superiority, but in reverse. Most people suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, where they overestimate their abilities in areas where they're actually incompetent. Imposter syndrome sufferers seem to have the opposite problem. They're so aware of what they don't know that they underestimate what they do know. It's like having a smoke detector that's so sensitive it goes off when you think about making toast. Your psychological threat detection system has become so finely tuned to potential incompetence that it starts seeing fraud everywhere, even in your legitimate accomplishments. Studies have shown that imposter syndrome is particularly common in competitive environments and among people from underrepresented groups. If you're the only woman in a room full of male engineers or the first person in your family to attend college, your brain might reasonably conclude that you don't belong, even when you absolutely do. There's also a cultural component that's absolutely fascinating. In individualistic cultures like the United States, where personal achievement is highly valued, imposter syndrome rates are higher than in collectivistic cultures where success is viewed as more of a group effort. It's as if the more pressure we put on individual achievement, the more our brains rebel by insisting we're not actually achieving anything. The irony is that imposter syndrome often drives people to work harder, prepare more thoroughly, and pay closer attention to details, which can actually make them more competent. It's like having a personal trainer who motivates you through constant criticism and the threat of public humiliation. Effective, perhaps, but not exactly pleasant. So now that we've established that your brain is basically running a psychological protection racket against your own success, you're probably wondering how to fire your internal fraud police and actually enjoy your accomplishments without waiting for the competence police to show up with handcuffs. The first step, according to cognitive behavioral therapy research, is recognizing that imposter syndrome is essentially a thinking error, not a reflection of reality. Your brain has become really good at collecting evidence for why you're a fraud, while completely ignoring evidence for why you're actually competent. It's like having a detective who only investigates cases that confirm their pre-existing theory. One of the most effective techniques is something psychologists call evidence gathering, but in a good way this time. Instead of letting your brain cherry-pick examples of your incompetence, you actively collect evidence of your actual achievements, skills, and positive feedback. Keep a file of compliments, successful projects, and moments when you actually knew what you were doing. It's like building a legal case for your own competence. Another powerful approach is reframing your internal dialogue. Instead of, "I don't know what I'm doing," try, "I'm learning as I go," like literally everyone else. Instead of, "They're going to find out I'm a fraud," try, "I'm qualified to be here, even if I don't know everything yet." It's the difference between being your own worst enemy and being your own slightly encouraging friend. Research shows that talking about imposter syndrome actually reduces its power significantly. When you realize that the Nobel Prize winner sitting next to you also feels like they're making it up as they go along, it becomes harder to believe that you're uniquely unqualified. It's like discovering that everyone else is also wearing their pants inside out. Suddenly you don't feel so ridiculous. There's also something called impostor syndrome exposure therapy, though it's not as terrifying as it sounds. The idea is to gradually put yourself in situations where you might feel like an imposter, and then survive the experience with your reputation intact. Apply for that job you think you're underqualified for. Speak up in the meeting. Share your ideas even when you're not 100% certain they're brilliant. One particularly effective technique is what I like to call competence accounting. Every time you catch yourself attributing success to luck or external factors, force yourself to identify at least one thing you personally did to contribute to that success. It's like being your own forensic accountant, but instead of tracking money, you're tracking your actual contributions. And here's something that might blow your mind. Accepting that you don't know everything and that you're still learning doesn't make you an imposter. It makes you human. The goal isn't to achieve perfect confidence. It's to develop what psychologists call calibrated confidence, where your self-assessment actually matches your abilities. Now, I should probably mention that completely eliminating imposter syndrome might not be entirely desirable, even if it were possible. A little bit of self-doubt can be motivating, keeping you humble and driving you to continue improving. The goal isn't to become one of those insufferably overconfident people who think they're experts after reading one Wikipedia article. The key is finding what researchers call the optimal zone of imposter syndrome, where you have just enough self-doubt to stay motivated and keep learning, but not so much that you're paralyzed by fear of being discovered as a fraud. It's like seasoning your psychological soup. A pinch of humility enhances the flavor, but too much ruins the whole dish. Recent studies have shown that people who experience mild imposter syndrome often perform better than those who are completely confident in their abilities. They prepare more thoroughly, listen more carefully to feedback, and are more likely to acknowledge their mistakes and learn from them. It's as if a small amount of psychological insecurity acts like a performance-enhancing drug for competence. What's particularly interesting is that imposter syndrome seems to be somewhat contagious in a positive way. When leaders admit they don't have all the answers and that they're still learning, it creates psychological safety for their teams to do the same. It's like giving everyone permission to be human instead of pretending to be infallible robots. The research also suggests that imposter syndrome might actually be a sign of intelligence and self-awareness. People who are too confident in their abilities often lack the metacognitive skills to recognize what they don't know. If you're worried about being an imposter, you probably have enough self-awareness to accurately assess your limitations, which is actually a valuable skill. One final thought that I find absolutely delightful: imposter syndrome is essentially your brain's way of caring about doing a good job. It's misguided and often counterproductive, but at its core, it's trying to protect you from failure and embarrassment. It's like having an overprotective parent who's convinced that leaving the house will result in immediate disaster. So the next time your brain starts its familiar routine of convincing you that you're a fraud who's somehow fooled everyone into thinking you're competent, you can acknowledge it, thank it for its concern, and then proceed to do your job anyway. Because here's the beautiful irony. The fact that you're worried about being good enough probably means you are. And remember, if imposter syndrome were actually accurate, then 70% of the population would be complete frauds accidentally stumbling through their careers, which would make the world a much more chaotic place than it already is. The fact that society functions at all is pretty good evidence that most of us actually know what we're doing, even when our brains insist otherwise. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the wonderfully ridiculous landscape of imposter syndrome. If you enjoyed learning about how your brain conspires against your self-confidence, make sure to subscribe for more semi-professional psychological insights into why humans are so beautifully, brilliantly broken. And remember, feeling like an imposter doesn't make you one, it just makes you human. Now go forth and be competent, even if your brain insists you're winging it.